Good morning, students. Welcome to the live stream. It's good to be back. I mean, it's been a little while, right? So, welcome back to the live stream. It's Tuesday, somehow. It feels like it's Thursday or something. I don't know. But we're here. You're here. We're going to have a good old time. I think this is a stream that a lot of people have been looking forward to. At least in terms of the topics that we cover in this class. I know this is the thing that people get excited for. And, you know, that's something that we can think about. And good morning to you two, Zane and Victoria. Super glad that you're here. Glad you came back. Couple things before we get started. Good morning, Mariana. Glad you're here. Couple things that we need to cover before we jump in. And good morning, Sheena. I've made a bunch of announcements on Blackboard in the past like 48 hours. Okay, and by a bunch I mean like 2. There's a welcome back message, and there is an extra credit opportunity for you. So if you haven't had a chance to look at those yet, maybe now is the time to have a look. The extra credit opportunity is exciting, and I was actually just prepping for my presentation before we jumped on the stream. So if you come to my talk, meaning you attend the Zoom lecture that I'm giving on Thursday evening, and do a little write-up for it, you get some points added on to your first argument essay, which ends up, you know, helping a lot if you're struggling. So that's there for you. You can take a look at the flyer. We're going to be talking about the apocalypse and the new world. So if you want to know about Christopher Columbus and his religious views, and the Spanish and their religious views, as at least some of them, as they applied to the New World, it would be a good lecture to attend, to say the least. It's super interesting. It's research I've been doing for about a year now. Well, not quite a year, about 9 months. So that's coming up on Thursday. As far as other stuff this week, since we didn't do an intro video this week, You've got some of your basic assignments to do. Remember that the discussion board has changed a little bit, so make sure you read the announcement on that. That way, you aren't doing the stuff that you were doing before. Basically, what's changed, if you don't know, is that I eliminated the asking a question and the replies part of the assignment, and you are just writing an original post, and there's a new rubric that you should check out. That sort of thing. So, those are the big announcements. Other than that, let's spare no time, and let's jump into what y'all came here for. It's World War II week, folks, and I know that makes people super excited, because World War II captures the American imagination in a way that no other event does. And, think about it. Think about it for just a minute. And think about the last time you watched the History Channel, if you ever watched the History Channel, and there wasn't a show like Ice Road Truckers or Pawn Stars or whatever it is on the History Channel now. And they actually showed a history program. It was probably on World War II. If you have a living relative that served in World War II, that gains you kind of a quiet respect. I mean, the people who are dishing out that respect the relative more than they do you, of course, but there's still kind of that awe-inspiring, like, oh, my grandfather served in the Navy in World War II, or my grandfather flew planes in World War II, or my great uncle was a spy for the United States behind German lines during World War II. That last one's true for me, actually. My great uncle Rudy, who unfortunately is no longer alive, he just a special kind of guy. Lived in New York, kind of grew up there when the family came over. Broadway trained actor. Went to Juilliard. Was in several plays and musicals on Broadway. He was in the original production of Hello, Dolly, for example. He had an extra part in the original King Kong movie. And during World War II, because he looked like what the Germans thought was the pinnacle of humanity, German, blonde hair, blue eyes, all of that. He served our country by going behind enemy lines and spying on the Nazis. And unfortunately, he never talked about it. I would have loved to have known some stories to tell you, but alas, I don't. Maybe I'll find a journal of his one day. And that would be cool. But in any case, part of the reason why I think, and you can take this with a grain of salt, part of the reason why I think World War II captures the American imagination so much is in some ways it's the birth of the modern United States in terms of our place in the world, right? Because up until this point, the United States is kind of a side player. Let's be honest here. We've spent a lot of time talking about the United States, but this is an American history class. Now, if we compare the United States in 1860, 1870, even 1890 and 1900, they pale in comparison to some of the other Western countries in terms of world importance. Countries like Britain and France, and to some extent Germany too. We don't want to give them too much credit on World War II Day. And the part of the reason why that's the case is because of 19th century imperialism and some other things that we've talked about. But the United States, they're kind of playing catch up. But after World War II, that changes considerably. The United States becomes the premier superpower of the world. Well, at least one of them. And we have the Soviet Union to contend with. But if we think about our place in the world now, as this kind of, at least how we see ourselves as this kind of global leader. Well, that begins post World War II. So in many ways, World War II is kind of our origin story, if you will. And I want to make a Snyder Cut joke here, but I can't think of one today. I my joke brain is broken. And yeah, that's just the way it is. So what we're gonna do is we're going to track a couple of things, and we only have an hour, so we're gonna have to go through some of these things quickly. We're gonna track, number one, why the United States gets involved in this war. It's not as simple as you think. Number two, we're going to spend, I'm sorry, 0 time on the battles themselves. If you want narratives of the important battles like Normandy and Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, etc., I encourage you to read beyond even our textbook, because you're going to find more information there that's going to be helpful to you. And there's so much of it. There's just so much of it. So we're going to take a look at that. We're not going to take a look at that. I want to spend time talking about what the United States looked like at home during the war, because we don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. And then lastly, depending on how much time we have, I want to talk a little bit about the bomb, because the decision to drop 2 nuclear bombs onto Japan fundamentally alters the world in a couple of different ways. So that's where we're going to spend our time. Why we get into this war, what the home front looks like, and we'll talk a little bit about the bomb. So let's rewind a little bit and kind of remind ourselves where we were at before we took our spring break. And we were in the middle of the Great Depression and the rollout of the New Deal. And as some of you pointed out in your discussion posts, etc., the New Deal only goes so far. It doesn't completely solve the issues of the Great Depression. There's still struggling going on, and part of the reason is because of the global nature of the Great Depression. Now, during this time, things in Europe were not so good too. I mean, besides just economically, in places like Germany, there was a lot, and I mean a lot, of resentment towards the Treaty of Versailles. If you remember, the Treaty of Versailles was the treaty that ended World War I, and it required Germany to do a couple things. Number one, pay reparations to Britain and France, and to completely disarm. They were not allowed to have more than a set number of military members. They're not allowed to do military research, all that sort of stuff. Now, also in Germany, they had a bit of a democracy problem. So the rise of Hitler, which is a class, and I mean a semester class in and of itself, we'll summarize here, is that prior to the rise of the Nazis, there's this period in German history called the Weimar Republic. And the Weimar Republic is a Western-style democracy. It doesn't go very well for Germany, in part because there's a lot of traditionalists who were kind of used to the more kind of monarchical way of doing things, and Germany's kind of a complex country to say the least. Even though we think of Germany as this cohesive country now, it wasn't always that way. In fact, Germany doesn't really unite until after the Cold War ends. After East and Western Germany come back together, it's complicated to say the least. But in any case, this democracy, this Weimar Republic, doesn't have strong leadership. and it seems to play against the German people. Plus, there's a lot of economic anxiety, etc. And the National German Workers' Party, at least that's what they were called at first, started to push back. And this is a far-right organization that is incredibly anti-Semitic. They blame Jews for almost all of the problems in the German society, and there's a bunch of stuff that happens, to say the least. The German Workers' Party, led by guess who? Adolf, I have a stupid fucking mustache Hitler, tries to overthrow the government in what is called the Beer Hall Putsch. They fail. Hitler ends up in jail, and while he's in jail, he writes his infamous, I should say, Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. Basically, I'm a whiny bitch who hates Jews, and I'm gonna write 600 pages about why I'm so oppressed because I'm the biggest fucking dick that's ever existed in history. It sells well, to say the least. And one of the things that this guy figures out while he's in prison and writes in Mein Kampf is that if his movement is going to take over Germany and perhaps the world, because, why stop at Germany? He's got to do things under the guise of the law. And what you'll notice, if you do a good study of the Nazi rise to power in Germany, is that after Hitler is released from prison and the German Workers' Party organizes back into the National Socialist Party, the Nazi Party, everything that they do is legal under German law in their rise to power. And everything that they do that we think of as evil now, because it was really evil, they did by making it a part of German law. All of the anti-Jewish stuff, all of the massacres, all of the genocide, all of that was done legally. Should scare the shit out of you. That's what that should do. In any case, all of this is happening. And Europe is watching this happen. The United States is watching this happen. And Britain and France are nervous about it, but Britain and France don't really do anything. Neither does the United States. And the United States is very clear, we are going to stay neutral. We do not want to get involved in another European war. World War I was enough for us. We don't want to get involved in this again. We want to pull back. And in fact, in the mid-1930s, 1935, under Franklin Roosevelt, the U.S. Congress passes the Neutrality Act to say we are going to be neutral. And what this does is it says that the United States is not going to trade weapons with any nation that's at war. So we're not going to trade with Britain. We're not going to trade with France. We're not going to trade with Germany. We're not going to trade with Japan. We're not going to trade with anyone who goes to war whatsoever. If they're at war, we don't trade arms with them. We don't trade weapons. Now, this does not sit well with many people, because reports about what the Nazis were doing in terms of deporting Jews, in terms of ghettoizing Jews and other minorities, and just the kind of general aggressive stance of the German government, the Nazi government, people did not like that the United States was going to do nothing about this. And you can read in the op a little bit more about that. But there's some pushback. And FDR kind of realizes this. FDR thinks that this isolationism is a mistake, and he goes about some creative ways of taking care of this. So the first thing that he does, and let me open a Word document to put on screen for us, just so we can have these things just in our mind's eye. So let me do the desktop capture here. Oh, look, it's Inception time. FDR institutes something called the cash, I can spell, and carry policy. And this is, like, sometimes we try to get away with shit, and I'm going to fix that spelling just a second. Let me blow this up a little. Cash and carry. What cash and carry does is it kind of weakens this stance of neutrality. So what FDR says is, look, if you're Britain and France, because we don't really like Germany very much, so we understand that they're a problem, and you need weapons, well, you can come to the US and you can buy our weapons, but you have to pay us cash for those weapons, and you have to bring them back on your own boats. Okay, so you've got to buy and you've got to take them home. So it looks like we're not involved. Okay, pay us cash, can't trace that, take it back on your boat. So if you get caught with the weapons that you bought from us, well, they're on your boat. We can't really say anything about that. And, this works for a little while. But then Germany gets more aggressive. And Germany starts invading places. They do things like they annex Austria. And this is the breaking point for Britain and France, they invade Poland. And when Hitler invades Poland, this is really when the war in Europe begins. The war in the Pacific is starting to rumble, but it's not front and center just yet. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think you know what's coming. So in any case, we have Hitler starting to push into Eastern Europe. Russia's pissed off, and there's a whole history between Hitler and Stalin that would take hours to unpack. You can read about the non-aggression pact, etc. Russia's pissed. Britain's pissed. France is pissed for now. They're not going to be pissed for long, because Germany's about to kick them in the teeth. It's the way it goes. And so they declare war. And now we have Europe at war. And then Germany decides that it's going to come and try to invade Britain. The Battle of Britain is a key moment in the war. And things were going fairly well for Germany. For the most part. I mean, the Royal Air Force holds off quite a bit of the German advances, but ultimately what kind of brings Germany out of Britain is this bit of a stalemate, and then Hitler wants to go invade Russia because he really hates Joseph Stalin. In any case, this is when the United States, the Battle of Britain, this is when the United States really starts to ramp things up. And FDR pushes the issue further, and he enacts something called the Lend-Lease program. And the Lend-Lease program is kind of another advancement of the cash and carry program. And basically, what it says is, we, the United States government, are going to allow countries that are vital to our national security to borrow or lease weapons from us. So if Britain, who is our ally, needs a tank, we can lend them a tank, but they're going to promise to give it back to us. I want you to think about that for a minute. You are going to lend the United Kingdom, Britain, a tank for a war in Europe. What do you expect to get back? Some scrap metal? Or let's put it in even more sharp relief. Let's say we loan them some grenades and they use those grenades. What are they going to give us back? Like the pins? It's kind of funny. But in any case, the point here is that slowly but surely the United States is getting involved with the war in Europe. Now, there is resistance to this back at home, especially starting in the late 30s and even into the beginnings of the 40s. The push for neutrality and continued neutrality is really, really strong. In fact, there is a whole movement based on this wanting to keep out of the war, kind of like there was in World War I. This time it's a little bit different. It's called the America First movement. And talking about America First, the 1940s version of America First, because it's now America First, that slogan is now the one of the many slogans of the Trump Republican Party. You can see it in their rhetoric. It's always capital A, capital F, America First. It's there. That is a third rail that I don't want to touch right now, but I want to make you aware of it at the very least. I'm going to try to stick to late 30s, early 40s America First for right now. And if you want to draw some comparisons, that's on you. So, the America First of the 1930s, 1940s, they're very much about this. We need to stay out of the war. We need to this isn't our problem. What's happening in Europe is just not our problem. And I mean, it's very clear that the United States knows that something is up in Germany in terms of like the Holocaust. The precise details of the camps and the factory of executions that were happening in the United States, you know, there's still questions about whether or not, not whether or not, but how much the United States actually knew. You know, like, did they understand did the U.S. government completely understand the inner workings of the Auschwitz camp, for example, until our soldiers saw it for their own eyes? It's tough to say, but we knew something was going on. We had seen the deportations. We had seen the ghettoizations. We had heard about the execution squads. We knew about the camps. We knew that there were camps. We did. The question is, did we know about the systematic murder going on in those camps? Tough question. Now, in the face of that knowledge, the America First Committee, led by pilot hero Charles Lindbergh, they come off as pretty anti-Semitic. And Lindbergh really sealed his fate when he said some anti-Semitic things in public. And, you know, to use the language of 2021, this caused him to get canceled. That's not quite the way it worked, but hopefully that helps you understand. He was actually going to run for president. But when those anti-Semitic statements that he made came out, it was impossible. It wasn't going to happen. Also, back at home, there was, you know, like, Lindbergh and the America First Committee and their anti-Semitism, you know, is veiled, okay? But there were just some straight up hardcore Nazis in the United States. There was a group called the American Bund, and they had followers, a lot of them. And if you want to see what one of their meetings looked like, if you look at our material for this week, you'll notice a link to a short film called A Night at the Garden, where several thousand members of the American Bund, this American Nazi party essentially, met at Madison Square Garden and held a Nazi rally. It's what it is. You can watch it for yourself, and you can read about some of the stuff that happens. It's terrifying, to say the least. So in any case, slowly and surely, we're getting our foot in the door in terms of this war. There's resistance to it at home. The nature of that resistance causes historians to kind of look back and be like, man, what the hell is going on here? Now, we know what gets us involved in this war once and for all, and it's Pearl Harbor. Okay, and not the Ben Affleck movie, all right? You know, it's... Michael Bay has dropped a lot of bad stuff on us over the years. I'm thinking like Transformers 3 or 4, or, you know, like he can't give us the mid to late 90s classic The Rock every single time. If you've never seen The Rock, Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, Alcatraz, it's a great 90s movie, to say the least. But man, come on, Transformers 3? Bro. Anyway, Pearl Harbor is the culmination of a couple of things. Number one, it's going to mean our entry into the war, but it also means that this war is growing onto another front, because, as you know, the Germans did not bomb Pearl Harbor, the Japanese did. And now we kind of get back into that system of crazy alliances and how geo-world politics really affects the situation here. So let's, again, make a long story really short. Japan, at this point, had really kind of adopted this Western style of imperialism, but made it their own. So Japan had been separated from the West for a really long time. In the middle of the 19th century, they opened themselves up to the West, and they become more influenced by the West. And I think one of the end consequences of the influence of the West is that Japan kind of gets the imperialism bug, let's say. And Japan wants to create a unified Asia under Japan, because they think that they're the greatest at the time. So Japan is doing everything they can in China to put China under their thumb. They're expanding into Southeast Asia and all kinds of other places. And they're doing some really bad stuff out there anyway. I mean, look at the rape of Nanking, if you need an example. Right? They are brutally murdering people. It's bad. And I mean, that's not going to get our attention, right? Not too much. Like, we're not going to go to war over that. However, Japan is an island nation. They don't have a whole lot of resources. And one of the things that they need to feed their imperial machine is they need a lot of oil. Kind of like we do, right? So Japan is starting to expand into places in Southeast Asia in particular known for their oil reserves. We don't like this because, number one, we like oil. Number two, our European allies, like the French, have a lot of holdings out there in Southeast Asia. And I'm thinking of Vietnam in particular here. So, you know, we start throwing economic sanctions on Japan. Just boom, boom, boom. You know, you are going to pay this extra tax. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to tax them into not being dicks anymore. Okay, to stop that imperialist expansion. We're going to put economic penalties on them, and that's going to make them stop. Well, Japan doesn't like this idea. So what Japan decides to do is spring an attack before we can attack them. they decide that they're going to attack Pearl Harbor. But all of the intelligence that they release suggests that they're going to attack the Philippines, which they do. I'll be clear. They do that. But while we are looking at the Philippines and kind of being like, okay, we know an attack is going to come and it's going to come here, Japan is sending a fleet out into the Pacific to hit us in Hawaii. And they do. And they sink some battleships, particularly the USS Arizona, which is still in Pearl Harbor to this day. And I lived in Hawaii for 5 years, guys. One of the first things I did when I lived there is I went and saw the Arizona. And it is a somber place, to say the least. You go out on a boat and you go to this dock where the memorial is. And this dock straddles the top of the Arizona. And you can walk out and you can stand over it. And to this day, the Arizona still belches out oil. Okay, so it sunk in December of 1941. And here in 2021, it's still pumping out oil into the harbor. It's not a lot. It's not causing an environmental catastrophe. But you can see this small line of oil just trail away out to sea from the boat. You have to see it for yourself. And it's a living tomb. Some bodies were never taken out, and in fact, survivors of Pearl Harbor, especially those who served on the Arizona, request that their remains be interred in the Arizona when they die. And it's not the case very much anymore, because it's 2021 and people die. But when you go to Pearl Harbor, at least when I went there in 2006 for the first time, there were still survivors who would come and talk to you, and tell you about their experience. It was an incredible kind of thing. In any case, once Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, we're in. That's it. We're in this war. And we declare war on Japan. And because we have declared war on Japan, Germany declares war on us. They're just waiting. Okay. They're out. Japan and Germany are allies, as is Italy. Nobody cares about Italy, stupid Mussolini. That's not completely true. Some people care about Mussolini. But, in terms of like the Axis powers, man, it's Germany and Japan, and Italy's just kind of the guy who hangs on but isn't really a part of the group kind of thing. I don't know. He's very much a third wheel. Italy's very much a third wheel in this case. But anyway, Germany declares war on us. We declare war back. Now we are in this thing. And the United States decides that we're going to try to help win the war in Europe first. Because if we do that, then maybe we can get some help out in the Pacific. And we don't want to be fighting a war on two fronts. And it looks like by 1941, Hitler's failed in a couple of different ways. Hitler has failed in his attempts to take Britain. He's going to end up failing in terms of his conquest of Russia. It doesn't go well for him, and that's a good thing, of course. So that's where the stories of D-Day and all the rest come in. Now, to sum up the rest of the war, things go fairly well in Europe. The war ends by 1945 fairly quickly. We're in this war for 4 years. Oh, it's a lot longer than we were in the war for World War One. But eventually, the Soviets push from the east. We, along with the British and some of the remaining French resistance, push from the west. Get to Berlin. Hitler puts a bullet in his own head. it's over. And so everything turns to the Pacific. Now in the Pacific, it's a lot more of an arduous battle. We're having to go from island to island, taking the Japanese out where we can. And eventually we're hovering off the coast of the Japanese mainland. But we can't actually get them to surrender. And we'll pick up the story of the bomb from there in a few minutes. Now, back at home, things are not as good as we want to think that they are. So we tend to remember the period of World War II, at least on the American home front, in terms of all of the things that Americans did to cooperate with each other. That we came together in this time of trouble and overcame not just the Great Depression, but the threat of Nazi and Japanese imperialism. And at home, the story is troubling. There's a couple things that I want to point your attention to. And we'll kind of go through a list here. So, first of all, let's talk about African Americans. As you might know, the armed forces were still segregated. So black people served in the United States military, but they fought in segregated units, just like they did in World War I. It's going to turn out that black participation in the armed forces during World War II is going to support and undergird the civil rights movement. So that's something that you want to keep track of. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about the civil rights movement, but I want to put it on your radar now. So, but at the time, again, segregated units, that's how it went. So there were a lot of people who felt like the army was failing in its mission. And W.E.B. Du Bois says something along the lines of like, they're Jim Crowing the army and that sort of stuff. At home, things aren't great either. One of the things that my wife studies, and she's a historian of World War II, that this is her primary focus, so I've learned a lot from her, is she studies racial violence on the American home front during the war. And there's a term that we use a lot now, especially after last summer. Race riot. And when we say race riot, what we mean is black people or people of color using violence to respond to slights, major slights, like the killing of George Floyd, committed by white people. And the police are usually at the center of these things, right? Well, back before This is a definition that really comes out of, oh my God, not 106. Hold on. Our definition of race riot, the one that I just gave you, really comes out of the 1960s. But prior to the 1960s, what a race riot meant was white violence being visited on minority communities. So things like the Tulsa riot of 1921, which we saw a few weeks back, the Red Summer riots of 1919, right after World War I. And there were race riots, white violence visited on black people during World War II. In the summer of 1943, there were riots in Detroit. There were riots in New York. There were riots in Los Angeles. There were riots in El Paso. There were riots in Tulsa, all over the place. And the cause of these riots, it depended. A lot of it was based on a kind of trial integration in the workplace, especially. And white people in Detroit, in particular, did not want to work next to black people. Didn't want it. In fact, one of the things that stands out from my wife's research, the bit of it that I've read, is she has a quote from an auto worker in Detroit who says, and I quote, "I would rather work next to Hirohito, the Japanese emperor, than work next to an N-word. I would rather work next to the Emperor of Japan, the leader of the nation that we are at war with, that committed the atrocity of Pearl Harbor against us, than work next to a guy with black skin." That's how much the hate ran deep. So the message here is that the home front is not necessarily this la la land of Americans working together. All of those same sorts of prejudices and whatnot still existed. In Los Angeles, actually, it wasn't African Americans, it was Latin Americans, Mexican Americans in particular. People in Los Angeles did not like Mexicans who wore zoot suits. And maybe you've heard of the zoot suit riots before. This was all about Latin culture, Mexican culture expressing itself in California and white resistance to it. Now, of course, I would be absolutely remiss if we didn't talk about Japanese internment. And given the events of last week, I think it's really important for us to understand the place of Asian Americans in the United States. And there's a lot of stuff that you could and should read about this. Asian people as a quote-unquote model minority. There's lots of stuff that you can and should read. But because Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, these older anti-Asian resentments started to bubble to the surface. And especially in the West, okay? Because think about the long history that we've kind of seen, not necessarily spotlighted, but recognized in the class so far. We talked about the Chinese Exclusion Act. We've talked about some of the immigration acts and quotas and how people of Asian descent were purposely pushed away from the United States. There's lots of that like anti-Asian sentiment. Well, now an Asian country, Japan, has attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, and the backlash is swift, and it is nasty. The government, FDR, the president, decides that the way to handle this is, because we don't know what Japanese person is collaborating with their government and who's loyal to the United States. So we decide to throw as many of them into internment camps as we possibly can on the West Coast. Okay, so from Washington State, Oregon, and especially in California, those western states is where the majority of Japanese Americans are, and in Hawaii to some extent too. They are removed from their homes, divested of their property, and shipped to camps in the middle of the country. In Wyoming, Arkansas, all over the place. As you read in the book, 70% of them are American citizens. Okay? They're not Japanese citizens. They're just people of Japanese descent. People who look foreign, right? So we have American citizens who are protected by the Constitution, who are being stripped of their property. The government is taking their property away, and the government is throwing them in camps, depriving them of their freedom. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness does not exist for them during World War II. There's no due process. Just one day, the armed forces show up, get on this bus, you're going away. For years. Years. And then when they're released, there's no reparation, no repayment, no recovery. They're left to start over. If you want to hear a firsthand account of this, you may know who George Takei is. He played Mr. Sulu on the original Star Trek series. He's also all over the internet. He wrote a musical called Allegiance, where he explores his experience in a camp. And part of the theme of the musical is how he loves this country, despite the fact that it did him and his family so wrong. Something to look into. Now, of course, that's all at home, and please read some more of the details in the textbook. I'm really condensing stuff. I mean, again, we could spend literal weeks, hours a day, talking about World War II. There's so much to unpack. But this ends with the use of the 2 atomic bombs. There's so much I want to tell you. I want to tell you about the types of bombs, the difference between a uranium bomb and a plutonium bomb, and kind of the race to get the first one. Here, I'll put this on the screen here. There is a historian, Richard Rhodes. He's written 2 books. One's about the atom bomb, the first one, and then the other is about the hydrogen bomb, which comes later. That are just great. There's also on PBS. There's a documentary called The Bomb. That's worth watching. If you want to know the ins and outs and you want to hear about the Manhattan Project, whatever. We decide to drop the bomb for a couple of reasons. Number one, it doesn't seem like Japan is going to surrender. And Harry Truman, because now FDR had died, Harry Truman was faced with a series of bad propositions. Had we continued with conventional bombing and the invasion of Japan, like had been planned, we stood to lose hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of American soldiers, and the casualties to Japan would have been also catastrophic, and we don't know how long it would have taken. Plus, there's this mustachioed dick from Russia named Joseph Stalin, who we want to show that we're the boss. And he's trying to get a bomb too. And so in August of 1945, August 6th, we dropped the first one on Hiroshima. 3 days later, because we hadn't heard from Japan about an unconditional surrender, we dropped another one, this time on Nagasaki. All told, hundreds of thousands of civilians die. We picked military targets, but the destructive power of these bombs is such that it doesn't matter. Like, imagine if somebody dropped a nuke today on Fort Bliss, right? They picked a military target, but how many civilians are going to die? Think about how many people live close to the base, just off the base, who work at the base, the airport, all that sort of stuff. I mean, the collateral damage is huge. The decision of whether or not to drop the bomb is one of the big moral questions in American history, and I really invite you to think about it. Usually in a face-to-face class, I'll do a whole class on the bomb, and I'll make you decide at the end whether or not you drop it. And usually 90% of the class says, oh yeah, we'll drop the bomb. No question. And all of the dudes always want to drop the bomb. Usually it's the ladies who are like, maybe we should think about this a little bit more. But the dudes, like, it's always some dude right away who's just like, I'm dropping the bomb, bro. I'm dropping it right now. Okay, chill. It's all right, man. In any case, it's a big moral question. It's something that you, as somebody who lives in the United States, should wrestle with. You know, like, was this the right thing to do? And I don't have an answer for you. I really don't. That's the beauty of history, is you get to decide. So, in any case, to wrap it up, our decision to drop 2 bombs changes the face of the world. Since that time, no nuclear weapon has been used in warfare. If a country or a non-state terrorist agency, like let's say ISIS or Al-Qaeda, used a nuclear weapon, it's a red line that no one's willing to cross. Like, we got through the Cold War, which we'll talk about, with Russia without dropping nukes on each other by some miracle. We didn't end the world with these devices, but I mean, we could. I think the United States has somewhere around 1,600 nuclear weapons active right at this very moment, ready to go. 1,600 of them, all more powerful than the one we dropped on Hiroshima. It's crazy to me. Anyway, the bomb puts us, in part, at the forefront of the world order, because we're the only ones until 1949 who have it. We'll talk about, when we talk about the Cold War next week, we'll talk about it. Why 1949? And because none of World War II was fought on our shores, except for Pearl Harbor, but the majority of the fighting happened in Europe, and it happened in Japan and in Asia, continental Asia. We don't have a big recovery to handle. And all of our machinery from both the New Deal and the war effort really jump-started our economy. And we come out of World War II looking great, looking real good. And things are going to change for the United States significantly because of this. And we're going to have to explore those changes for the rest of the semester. And that's really kind of like the post-war United States is its own field of study. And that's where we're headed from here on out. So I'll pause. And if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I'll see if I can get them answered. All right. Well, thanks for chiming in there, Zane. It looks like we don't have any questions at the moment, which is totally fine. That was like an avalanche of information that was just thrown at you, just bam. But I hope that this kind of brings some of the issues that you're reading about in the textbook to life a little bit, and helps you understand the primary sources a little bit more. If you have any questions about that stuff, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm basically by my computer all the time. especially right now because I'm writing. So send me a question. I'll get them to you as quickly as I possibly can. Yeah, so we'll call it a day there. I'm going to go make some lunch and check on PS5 stock because my brother wants one and I'm trying to help him out. So back to a Discord server to see if I can't get one scored. Like I do during lunch every day. So, if you have questions, hit me up, let me know. And then otherwise, y'all, I will see you guys soon in the next stream or in the next video. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Take care, y'all.